Here, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers braid into one, where civilization's first roots pierce the soil, our journey begins. This fertile crescent, a forge of new ideas, saw the first scratch of writing in Sumer around 3200 BCE. The towering walls of Uruk and Ur rise from the earth, and Hammurabi of Babylon chisel laws into stone around 1754 BCE. These early societies, fed by grain surpluses and bustling marketplaces, stacked the first bricks of human order, yet also scattered the enduring seeds of strife. Control over these life-giving river currents, over green fields, and over winding trade paths became a constant tug-of-war between city-states and infant empires. From this same ancient dust, a new current surged, one that would carve the fate of millions for thousands of years: monotheism. Around 1800 BCE, as stories tell, Abraham, a patriarch from Ur, began a trek that would forever etch itself onto the spiritual landscape. His pact with a single, all-seeing God, a stark break from the many-faced deities of the time, birthed Judaism, a faith built around a chosen lineage and a promised land, Canaan, a place that would later be mapped as Israel and Palestine. The story of their flight from Egypt under Moses, the thunderous giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and the subsequent sweep into Canaan, forged a powerful sense of divine decree and an ancient claim to a specific plot of earth. This deeply woven thread connecting a people, their God, and a land would prove both a bedrock of immense strength and a tangled knot of future battles. Centuries later, in the 6th century BCE, the Persian Achaemenid Empire, under Cyrus the Great, unfurled its vast banner across the region, stretching its dominion from the Aegean's blue waters to the Indus Valley. Cyrus's policy of open doors to different faiths, particularly for the Jews exiled in Babylon, allowed their footsteps to return to Jerusalem and the Second Temple's stones to rise again. This era, though under foreign command, offered a quiet pause and a mingling of cultures. However, the sheer sprawl of the Persian Empire made it a beacon for distant threats, especially from the burgeoning strength of Greece. Alexander the Great's arrival in 334 BCE shattered the Persian Imperium like glass. His lightning-fast campaigns, culminating in the conquest of the entire Achaemenid Empire, ushered in the Hellenistic Age. Upon his death in 323 BCE, his vast empire fractured into pieces among his generals, the Diadochi. The Middle East became a wrestling ground for the Seleucid Empire, stretching its arms from Anatolia to India, and the Ptolemaic kingdom, rooted in Egypt. These Hellenistic kingdoms, while pouring in Greek words, customs, and architecture, also planted a foreign elite and often clashed with local ways and sacred rites. The Maccabean revolt in Judea, igniting in 167 BCE, stands as a fiery testament to the resistance against Hellenistic absorption, a fight for spiritual and cultural breathing room that echoes through the centuries. The Roman Empire, a rising titan in the West, eventually swallowed these Hellenistic successor states. Pompey the Great's conquest of Judea in 63 BCE marked the first direct Roman boot on the ground, a time marked by relative calm but also by restless stirrings and brutal crushing of revolts. The Jewish-Roman Wars, particularly the Great Revolt of 66 to 73 CE, which saw the Second Temple in Jerusalem crumble to dust, and the Bar Kokhba Revolt of 132 to 135 CE, left immense piles of dead and scattered the Jewish people far and wide, a diaspora that would stretch for nearly 2,000 years. The Roman province of Judea was renamed Syria Palestina, a symbolic scrub of Jewish identity from the land. As the Roman Empire slowly sagged and eventually tore itself in two, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, inherited much of the Middle East. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire, with Constantinople as its gleaming crown, wrestled in a prolonged and often draining embrace with the Sasanian Persian Empire for control of Mesopotamia, Syria, and Egypt. These drawn-out wars, fueled by imperial hunger and clashing faiths, Byzantine Christianity against Zoroastrianism, bled both empires dry of resources and left the region exposed to new currents. It was into this landscape of worn-out empires and simmering religious friction that Islam burst forth in the 7th century CE. In the Arabian Peninsula, a land largely untouched by the great empires, the Prophet Muhammad received visions in Mecca and Medina, beginning around 610 CE. His teachings, painting a clear picture of one God, social fairness, and submission, quickly bound together the scattered Arab tribes. By 632 CE, the year of his death, Islam had planted itself as a mighty spiritual and political oak. The subsequent Islamic conquests were a whirlwind of speed and reach. Within a few decades, Arab armies, propelled by religious fire and sharp blades, swept across the Middle East. They swallowed the Sasanian Empire whole by 651 CE and tore vast territories from the Byzantines, including Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. Jerusalem, a city with holy echoes for Jews and Christians, fell to the Rashidun Caliphate in 637 CE, marking a turning point in its long story. Damascus became the Umayyad Caliphate's capital in 661 CE, which further pushed the Islamic Empire's borders into Spain and Central Asia. The rise of Islam draped the region in a new cultural, linguistic, and religious cloak. Arabic became the shared tongue, and Islamic law, Sharia, became the frame for governance. While initial Islamic rule generally offered a wide berth to Christians and Jews, who were considered people of the book, and allowed to practice their faiths, they paid the jizya, a special tax. This system, while offering a shield, also etched a clear hierarchy. Over time, many local faces turned to Islam, drawn by its message, its social weave, and the advantages of belonging to the dominant faith. The Abbasid Caliphate, which unseated the Umayyads in 750 CE, shifted its capital to Baghdad, a new city rising on the Tigris's banks. This period, often called the Islamic Golden Age, saw an explosion of science, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and art. Baghdad became the world's intellectual beacon, collecting and pushing forward knowledge from Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian civilizations. However, even within this era of brilliance, cracks of internal division and whispers of external pressure began to surface. The empire's sheer size made central control a heavy burden, leading to the sprouting of autonomous or semi-autonomous regional dynasties, like the Fatimids in Egypt and the Seljuks in Persia and Anatolia. The arrival of the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century marked another profound shift. Originally nomadic riders from Central Asia, they embraced Sunni Islam and carved out a powerful empire that challenged both the Abbasid Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire. Their victory over the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE threw open Anatolia's doors to Turkish settlement, laying the first stones for the future Ottoman Empire. The Seljuks, growing grip on the Levant and their command over pilgrim routes to Jerusalem, thickened the air with tensions that would soon erupt into the Crusades. From the late 11th century to the late 13th century, a cascade of military campaigns, launched by Western European Christians, sought to snatch back the Holy Land from Muslim hands. The First Crusade, unfurled in 1096 CE, ended with the capture of Jerusalem in 1099 CE, and the planting of Latin Christian crusader states along the Levantan coast, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. These crusader states, foreign islands in a sea of Muslims, leaned perpetually on European aid and constantly clashed with their Muslim neighbors. The Crusades, though ultimately failing to plant lasting Christian flags, carved a deep legacy of distrust and religious bitterness, hardening faces on both sides and feeding a sense of endless conflict over sacred ground. The Muslim response to the Crusades was at first scattered, but eventually gathered strength under powerful figures like Saladin. His victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187 CE and subsequent recapture of Jerusalem marked a turning tide, showcasing the resilience and unifying power of Islamic leadership. Despite later crusades, the Christian grip on the Levant steadily slipped, culminating in the fall of Acre, the last major Crusader fortress, in 1291 CE. Even as the Crusades faded, a new and devastating storm swept across the Middle East: the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. Under Genghis Khan and his heirs, the Mongol Empire, born from Central Asia's wide steppes, unleashed unprecedented destruction. Baghdad, the pulsing intellectual heart of the Islamic world, was sacked in 1258 CE by Hulagu Khan, extinguishing the Abbasid Caliphate and marking a profound rip in culture and population. The Mongols' destructive marches decimated populations, shattered irrigation networks, and fundamentally reshaped the political map. While the Mongol Empire eventually splintered, and many of its rulers embraced Islam, the devastation it left behind etched deep scars that would take centuries to fade. Out of the chaos and fragmentation that followed the Mongol invasions, a new power began to bloom in Anatolia: the Ottoman Turks. Descendants of Oghuz Turks, the Ottomans, under leaders like Osman I, began to stretch their dominion in the late 13th and early 14th centuries. Their strategic perch on the edge of the weakened Byzantine Empire allowed them to absorb territories and draw in Ghazis, or frontier warriors. The fall of Bursa in 1326 CE and Edirne in 1362 CE cemented their foothold in Anatolia and the Balkans. The defining thunderclap of early Ottoman expansion came in 1453 CE, with Sultan Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople. This victory not only brought down the Byzantine Empire, a 1,000-year-old Christian bulwark, but also established the Ottoman Empire as a major world force and its new capital, Istanbul, as a buzzing crossroads of East and West. The Ottomans, embracing Sunni Islam, skillfully wove together diverse peoples and cultures into their vast empire, which at its peak spanned 3 continents. Under sultans like Selim I, 1512–1520 CE, and Sulayman the Magnificent, 1520–1566 CE, the Ottoman Empire reached its towering height. Selim I swallowed the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and Syria in 1517 CE, bringing the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman control and solidifying the Sultan's claim as caliph, the spiritual and political shepherd of the Muslim world. This expansion brought the Arab heartlands, including Jerusalem, Damascus, and Cairo, under Ottoman rule. Sulayman pushed the empire's borders further into Europe, reaching Vienna's gates in 1529 CE, and built a legal and administrative framework that would stand for centuries. For over 400 years, the Ottoman Empire draped a blanket of stability and order over much of the Middle East. While it was an imperial power, its millet system allowed religious communities, such as Jews and various Christian denominations, to govern themselves by their own laws, though as subjects. This system, while not without its friction, largely kept at bay the large-scale religious wars that tore through Europe during the same period. However, the seeds of future discord also lay hidden. The Ottoman administration, though generally effective, often felt distant, and local populations, particularly in the Arab provinces, held onto distinct cultural and linguistic threads. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the vast Ottoman Empire, once a formidable titan, began to shrink. Internal rot, a standstill in technology, and the rise of powerful European states led to a gradual peeling away of its territories and influence. European powers, especially Britain, France, and Russia increasingly saw the Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe and began to cast hungry eyes on its strategic lands, particularly those controlling vital trade arteries and access to resources. Russia yearned for a path to the Mediterranean through the Black Sea. Britain sought to guard its route to India through Egypt and the Suez Canal, and France aimed to spread its influence across North Africa and the Levant. This period saw the fiery birth of modern nationalism, a powerful idea that challenged the multi-ethnic, multi-religious tapestry of the Ottoman Empire. In the Balkans, various Christian groups, propped up by European powers, successfully broke free, leading to the independence of Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania. In the Arab provinces, a fledgling Arab nationalism began to stir, often fueled by unhappiness with Turkish rule and sparked by European ideals of self-determination. However, this Arab nationalism was still largely an idea whispered among intellectuals, lacking widespread popular roar or a unified political plan. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed a dramatic tightening of Europe's grip on Ottoman affairs. The Suez Canal's completion in 1869, an engineering marvel, turned Egypt into a geopolitical prize, leading to British occupation in 1882. France planted protectorates in Tunisia, 1881, and Morocco, 1912. The Ottoman Empire was losing its edges, and its central government in Istanbul struggled to push through meaningful changes. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908, a wave of reform-minded Ottoman officers and thinkers, aimed to update the empire and bring back constitutional rule. While initially promising, the Young Turks' increasingly Turkish-focused policies pushed away non-Turkish minorities, further fanning nationalist flames among Arabs, Armenians, and Kurds. The Balkan Wars of 1912–1913 delivered a crushing blow, tearing away almost all the empire's remaining European lands. The eruption of World War I in 1914 proved to be the final unraveling of the Ottoman Empire. Siding with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Ottomans found themselves facing the Allied powers, Britain, France, and Russia. This choice, driven by geopolitical calculations and a hunger to reclaim lost lands, proved disastrous. The war laid bare the empire's weaknesses and quickened its collapse. During the war, the Allied powers, especially Britain and France, carved out a series of secret deals designed to slice up the Ottoman Empire's Middle Eastern territories among themselves. The most infamous of these was the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. Negotiated by British diplomat Mark Sykes and French diplomat François-Georges-Picot, this secret pact unilaterally drew lines on a map across the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire, marking them for future British and French zones of influence. It drew arbitrary boundaries, largely ignoring existing ethnic, sectarian, and tribal seams, handing Syria and Lebanon to France and Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and Transjordan to Britain. Palestine was earmarked for international administration, though later British policy would tangle this further. Simultaneously, in a bid to rally support against the Ottomans, the British spun contradictory promises. The McMahon-Hussein Correspondence of 1915–1916 dangled before Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the Emir of Mecca, the vision of an independent Arab state stretching across much of the Levant and Arabian Peninsula, in exchange for leading an Arab revolt against Ottoman rule. This promise, however, directly clashed with the Sykes-Picot Agreement's territorial divisions and the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which pledged British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. These conflicting and often cynical promises laid the fertile ground for future grievances and deep-seated resentments among Arabs and Jews. The Arab Revolt, led by Sharif Hussein's sons Faisal and Abdullah, and aided by British officers like T.E. Lawrence, played a significant role in chipping away at the Ottoman war effort in the Middle East. However, the ultimate outcome was not the unified Arab state promised by McMahon, but rather the imposition of European mandates. By the close of World War I, the Ottoman Empire lay defeated, its vast territories under Allied boots. The Treaty of Sevres in 1920 formally broke apart the empire, shrinking it to a small state in Anatolia and handing large swathes of its former lands to the victorious powers. The subsequent Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, would eventually forge the modern Republic of Turkey. But the empire, which had shaped the Middle East for centuries, was gone. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire following World War I and the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The victors of the Great War, Britain and France, now moved to unfurl their secret blueprints, redrawing the Middle East's map with a cartographer's sharp pen, not with an understanding of its intricate human tapestry. The League of Nations, born in 1920, blesses this division through the mandate system, ostensibly a temporary guardianship to steer these new entities toward self-rule. France receives the mandates for Syria and Lebanon, while Britain is handed mandates for Mesopotamia, soon to be renamed Iraq, and Palestine, which includes Transjordan. These mandates are not merely administrative zones. They are, in practice, thinly veiled colonial possessions engineered to serve the strategic and economic appetites of the European powers. In Mesopotamia, now British-mandated Iraq, a new king, Faisal I, one of Sharif Hussein's sons, is crowned in 1921. This artificial state, stitched together from three distinct Ottoman provinces, the predominantly Shiite south around Basra, the Sunni Arab center around Baghdad, and the Kurdish north around Mosul, immediately splinters with deep internal fault lines. The British, with an eye on controlling Iraq's vast oil reserves, tapped in Kirkuk in 1927, heavily mold its political skeleton, often favoring the Sunni Arab minority to keep a lid on the Shiite majority and the restless Kurdish population. This foundational tilt will fester for decades, a constant tremor of instability. To the west, in French-mandated Syria, the arbitrary imposition of French rule ignites widespread resistance. France, wielding a divide-and-rule strategy, carves the territory into smaller, ethnically or religiously defined administrative pockets, including a separate Alawite state and a Druze state, further fracturing a nascent Syrian national identity. The Great Syrian Revolt of 1925–1927, a widespread roar against French rule, demonstrates the fierce opposition to foreign boots, but it is brutally crushed. Similarly, in Lebanon, France cultivates a Maronite Christian-dominated political structure, setting the stage for future sectarian clashes in a country already a mosaic of religious communities. The British mandate for Palestine presents a uniquely explosive situation. It is here that the conflicting promises spun during the war, to Sharif Hussein for an Arab state and to the Zionist movement for a Jewish national home, collide with devastating force. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 now becomes official British policy, encouraging Jewish immigration to Palestine. Between 1919 and 1939, propelled by Zionist ideals and rising anti-Semitism in Europe, the Jewish population in Palestine swells from approximately 60,000 to over 450,000, acquiring land and building institutions. The indigenous Arab population, who make up over 90% of the inhabitants at the mandate's dawn, view this influx as an existential wave threatening their land, their culture, and their future self-determination. The 1920s and 1930s in Palestine are scarred by escalating intercommunal violence. The Nebi Musa riots of 1920, the Jaffa riots of 1921, and the Wailing Wall incident of 1929 are early tremors of the deep-seated animosity. Arab leaders, such as Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, voice increasingly urgent warnings about Zionist expansion. The British, caught between irreconcilable demands, often sway back and forth, issuing various commissions of inquiry and white papers that try to soothe one side or the other, but ultimately satisfy neither. The Peel Commission in 1937, for example, suggests slicing Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, an idea rejected by both sides at the time, but a blueprint for future proposals. The Arab Revolt of 1936–1939 explodes as a comprehensive uprising against British rule and Zionist immigration. It involves widespread strikes that empty marketplaces, civil disobedience that clogs streets, and armed insurgency that echoes through the hills. The British respond with overwhelming force, unleashing thousands of troops, implementing collective punishments that burn villages, and executing Arab leaders. By the time the revolt is crushed, thousands of Arabs lie dead, imprisoned, or exiled, and the Palestinian national movement is severely weakened, its leadership decapitated. On the eve of World War II, the British issue the White Paper of 1939, putting a lid on Jewish immigration and land purchases, a move intended to quiet the Arabs, but it is too little, too late, and sparks outrage from the Zionist movement. Meanwhile, in Egypt, British influence remains a heavy hand despite a nominal independence granted in 1922, which installs a constitutional monarchy under King Fuad I. The British keep control over defense, foreign policy, and the Suez Canal, fueling nationalist resentment that simmers beneath the surface. The Waft Party, led by figures like Saad Zaghloul, campaigns for full independence, but British strategic interests, particularly concerning the Suez Canal, ensure their continued boots on the ground. The interwar period also sees independent banners unfurl in the Arabian Peninsula. In 1932, Abdulaziz ibn Saud consolidates his grip over much of the peninsula, establishing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, built on a conservative reading of Sunni Islam and the vast oil reserves discovered there in 1938. This new kingdom becomes a pivotal player, forging a tight bond with the United States, a relationship that will stretch for decades, rooted in gushing oil and shared security interests. World War II temporarily pulls attention away from regional grievances, but the underlying tensions continue to simmer like a banked fire. Allied victory against Nazi Germany brings new geopolitical realities. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews in Europe, galvanizes international support for a Jewish homeland, intensifying the urgency of the Zionist project. The United States, emerging as a global superpower, becomes an increasingly vocal advocate for the establishment of a Jewish state. With Britain economically drained and facing a crumbling empire, it hands the Palestine question to the newly formed United Nations in 1947. The UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, recommends partition. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly passes Resolution 181, recommending the slicing of Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Jewish Agency accepts the plan, seeing it as international legitimization for their state. The Arab states and the Palestinian Arabs vehemently reject it, viewing it as an unjust snatching of their land by foreign powers and a tearing up of their right to self-determination. The UN resolution immediately ignites a civil war in Palestine. Arab and Jewish militias clash, and as the British prepare to pack their bags, the violence escalates. Massacres stain both sides, such as the Deir Yassin massacre in April 1948, where Zionist forces kill over 100 Palestinian villagers, and the subsequent attack on a Jewish medical convoy near Hadassah Hospital. The flight and expulsion of Palestinians begin even before the official declaration of the State of Israel. On May 14, 1948, As the British mandate's official clock stops, David Ben-Gurion declares the establishment of the State of Israel. Within hours, the armies of Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, along with Saudi Arabian and Yemeni contingents, pour into the new state, initiating the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which Israelis call their War of Independence and Arabs call the Nakba or catastrophe. This war is a pivotal earthquake, fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of the Middle East. Against all odds, the nascent Israeli forces, better organized and fueled by fierce motivation, push back the invading Arab armies. By the time armistice agreements are signed in 1949, Israel has not only secured its existence, but expanded its territory beyond the UN partition lines, capturing 78% of historic Palestine. The remaining Palestinian territories are divided. The West Bank is swallowed by Transjordan, which renames itself Jordan, and the Gaza Strip falls under Egyptian military administration. Jerusalem is split, with East Jerusalem, including the Old City, under Jordanian control, and West Jerusalem under Israeli control. The human cost of the 1948 war is immense. Approximately 700,000 to 750,000 Palestinians become refugees, fleeing or being expelled from their homes in what becomes Israel. They seek shelter in neighboring Arab countries, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt, and in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, living in refugee camps, often in squalid conditions. Their right of return becomes a central, intractable demand in the Arab-Israeli conflict, a constant, echoing reminder of their dispossession. For Israel, the war solidifies its national identity and forges its military into a formidable force, but it also creates a permanent state of siege and a deep-seated enmity with its Arab neighbors. The aftermath of 1948 reverberates like a thunderclap throughout the Arab world. The defeat is a profound humiliation, laying bare the weakness and corruption of existing Arab regimes. This ignominy fuels a wave of revolutionary fervor and nationalist movements. In Egypt, a group of young military officers, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, stage a bloodless coup in 1952, toppling King Farouk and establishing a republic. Nasser quickly emerges as a charismatic leader, championing Pan-Arabism, a secular nationalist ideology advocating for the political and cultural welding together of Arab nations. He vows to avenge the 1948 defeat and confront Western imperialism. Nasser's rise marks a new era. He nationalizes the Suez Canal in 1956, a bold move that snatches control from British and French economic interests and sovereignty. This act triggers the Suez Crisis, also known as the tripartite aggression, where Britain, France, and Israel secretly plot to invade Egypt. Israel, under Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, launches a swift offensive into the Sinai Peninsula, while British and French forces bomb Egyptian airfields and land troops in Port Said, aiming to seize back control of the canal. However, the intervention draws sharp condemnation from the United States and the Soviet Union, both superpowers unwilling to see their Cold War rival gain too much sway in the region. Under intense international pressure, the invading forces are forced to withdraw. Nasser, despite the military setback, emerges as a triumphant hero in the Arab world, seen as standing tall against Western powers and Israel. The Suez Crisis significantly weakens British and French influence in the Middle East, while elevating Nasser's stature and solidifying the Cold War's grip on the region, as both superpowers begin to arm and influence regional allies. In Iraq, the Hashemite monarchy, placed there by the British, is overthrown in a violent coup in 1958, bringing to power a republican government. This event, coupled with the 1958 civil war in Lebanon, highlights the fragility of the post-colonial order and the enduring pull of pan-Arab nationalism, often at odds with existing state lines. Syria, also swept up in the Pan-Arab tide, briefly merges with Egypt to form the United Arab Republic, UAR. From 1958 to 1961, an experiment that ultimately fails due to political and ideological clashes, but underscores the powerful yearning for Arab unity. The 1960s witness increasing friction between Israel and its Arab neighbors, particularly Egypt and Syria. Border skirmishes, especially over water resources like the Jordan River, become frequent. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, is founded in 1964, a unified umbrella for various Palestinian factions, aiming to liberate Palestine through armed struggle. Its charter calls for Israel's destruction. Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, becomes the dominant faction within the PLO, launching guerrilla raids into Israel from neighboring countries, provoking Israeli retaliatory strikes. Nasser, driven by pan-Arab ideology and a desire to assert Egyptian leadership, increasingly engages in a war of words against Israel. In May 1967, under pressure from Arab public opinion and misinformed by Soviet intelligence about an imminent Israeli attack on Syria, Nasser takes a series of escalatory steps. He demands the withdrawal of the UN Emergency Force, UNEF, from the Sinai Peninsula, which had been stationed there since the Suez Crisis to act as a buffer. The UN, lacking Egyptian consent for its presence, complies. Nasser then moves Egyptian troops into the Sinai and, crucially, slams shut the Straits of Turin to Israeli shipping, effectively blockading Israel's access to the Red Sea and its port of Eilat. This act, Israel declares, is a casus belli, an act of war. As Arab armies mobilize along Israel's borders, including Egyptian forces in the Sinai, Syrian forces on the Golan Heights, and Jordanian forces in the West Bank, Israel perceives an existential threat. Its leadership, including Prime Minister Levi Eshkol and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, makes the decision for a preemptive strike. On June 5, 1967, at 7:45 a.m., Israel launches Operation Focus, a massive air assault that pulverizes the air forces of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq while their planes sit on the ground. This decisive blow gives Israel complete air superiority, a critical advantage in the conflict to come. The ground offensive follows immediately. In a lightning campaign lasting just 6 days, Israel achieves stunning victories on multiple fronts. In the Sinai, Israeli armored divisions crush the Egyptian army, driving deep into the peninsula and reaching the Suez Canal. On the Jordanian front, after initially holding back, Israel attacks the West Bank, capturing East Jerusalem, including the Old City and its holy sites, on June 7. Within days, Israeli forces overrun the entire West Bank, driving the Jordanian army across the Jordan River. Finally, on the Syrian front, Israel captures the strategically vital Golan Heights, overlooking the Galilee. By June 10, 1967, the fighting ends with a UN-brokered ceasefire. The Six-Day War is a catastrophic defeat for the Arab states and a monumental victory for Israel. In just 6 days, Israel triples its territory, occupying the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The immediate aftermath of the 1967 war profoundly reshapes the geopolitical landscape and the nature of the Arab-Israeli conflict. For the first time, Israel is in direct control of large Palestinian populations in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, territories it views as crucial for its security. The concept of land for peace emerges, with UN Security Council Resolution 242, passed in November 1967, calling for Israeli withdrawal from territories occupied in the recent conflict in exchange for recognition and secure borders for all states in the region. However, the resolution's ambiguity, particularly regarding the extent of withdrawal, becomes a persistent point of contention. Israel interprets territories occupied as not necessarily all territories, while Arab states insist on full withdrawal. The Palestinian national movement, previously overshadowed by Pan-Arabism, gains renewed urgency and prominence. The defeat of Arab armies in 1967 shatters the myth of their ability to liberate Palestine, shifting the focus to Palestinian self-reliance. Yasser Arafat and Fatah, having demonstrated effectiveness in guerrilla operations, rise to dominate the PLO. In 1968, the Battle of Karameh, where PLO guerrillas inflict significant casualties on Israeli forces in Jordan, further boosts their standing and attracts widespread support in the Arab world. The PLO establishes a de facto state within a state in Jordan, launching raids into Israel from Jordanian territory, which eventually leads to a violent confrontation with King Hussein's government in September 1970, known as Black September. Thousands of Palestinians are killed, and the PLO leadership, along with many of its fighters, are expelled from Jordan, relocating their headquarters to Lebanon. In Lebanon, the PLO's presence exacerbates sectarian tensions, contributing to the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War in 1975. This complex conflict involves Christian, Muslim, and Druze factions, often aligning with external powers, including Syria and Israel. The PLO, operating from southern Lebanon, continues its armed struggle against Israel, drawing Israeli retaliatory strikes and further destabilizing the fragile nation. The period following the Six-Day War also sees a hardening of Israeli resolve regarding the occupied territories. Settlements begin to dot the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, initially for security reasons but increasingly driven by religious and ideological motivations. These settlements, deemed illegal under international law by most of the world, become a major obstacle to peace, creating facts on the ground that make a future two-state solution increasingly difficult. Egypt and Syria, humiliated by the 1967 defeat, seek to regain lost territory and restore national honor. Anwar Sadat, who succeeds Gamal Abdel Nasser as president of Egypt after Nasser's death in 1970, understands that a military confrontation is necessary to break the diplomatic stalemate. He meticulously plans a surprise attack against Israel, coordinating with Syrian President Hafez al-Assad. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Egyptian forces launch a massive crossing of the Suez Canal and assault the Bar-Lev Line, Israel's formidable defensive fortifications in the Sinai. Simultaneously, Syrian forces attack the Golan Heights. The initial Arab offensive achieves significant tactical surprise and success, inflicting heavy casualties on the unprepared Israeli forces. The Yom Kippur War, also known as the October War, is a brutal and costly conflict. For days, Israeli forces struggle to repel the Egyptian and Syrian advances. The United States, under President Richard Nixon, launches a massive airlift to resupply Israel, while the Soviet Union resupplies Egypt and Syria, turning the Middle East into a proxy battleground of the Cold War. After intense fighting, Israel manages to turn the tide, pushing back the Syrian forces on the Golan and crossing the Suez Canal to encircle the Egyptian Third Army. A UN-brokered ceasefire takes effect on October 25, 1973. Although militarily a stalemate, the war is a psychological victory for Egypt and Syria, restoring Arab pride and demonstrating that Israel is not invincible. The Yom Kippur War has profound consequences. It leads directly to the 1973 oil crisis, as Arab oil-producing nations, led by Saudi Arabia, impose an oil embargo against countries supporting Israel, quadrupling oil prices and sending shockwaves through the global economy. More importantly, it paves the way for a diplomatic breakthrough. U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger engages in intensive shuttle diplomacy, leading to disengagement agreements between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Syria in 1974 and 1975. Anwar Sadat, emboldened by the psychological victory and convinced that perpetual war is unsustainable for Egypt, makes a dramatic and courageous move. In November 1977, he flies to Jerusalem, becoming the first Arab leader to walk on Israeli soil and address its parliament, the Knesset. This historic visit shatters decades of animosity and opens the door for peace negotiations. Under the mediation of U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem begin engage in 13 days of intense negotiations at Camp David in September 1978. The resulting Camp David accords lead to the signing of the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty in March 1979. Under the treaty, Israel withdraws completely from the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt becomes the first Arab nation to formally recognize Israel. Sadat and Begin share the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts. However, Sadat's peace initiative is met with condemnation from much of the Arab world, which views it as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. Egypt is suspended from the Arab League, and Sadat himself is assassinated by Islamist extremists in October 1981. Meanwhile, the Iranian Revolution in 1979 sends seismic waves across the Middle East. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a staunch U.S. ally, is overthrown by a popular uprising led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, an exiled Shiite cleric. The revolution establishes an Islamic republic based on a radical interpretation of Shiite Islam, transforming Iran from a pro-Western monarchy into an anti-Western, anti-Israeli, and revolutionary state that actively seeks to export its ideology. This event fundamentally alters the regional balance of power, creating a new, powerful, and ideologically driven actor that challenges the existing order and the influence of both the United States and the Soviet Union. The revolution also ignites fears among Sunni Arab monarchies, particularly Saudi Arabia, of a Shiite resurgence and Iranian expansionism. The Iran-Iraq War, from 1980 to 1988, is a direct consequence of the Iranian Revolution and Iraq's deep-seated rivalries with its neighbor. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, a secular Ba'athist leader, fears the spread of revolutionary Shiite Islam to Iraq's own Shiite majority and sees an opportunity to seize disputed territory, particularly the Shatt al-Arab waterway, and establish Iraq as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. In September 1980, Iraq invades Iran. The war quickly devolves into a brutal, attritional conflict reminiscent of World War I trench warfare, characterized by massive human wave attacks, chemical weapons use that chokes the air, and attacks on oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Both sides receive support from various international actors. Iraq, despite its invasion, is largely backed by the United States and most Arab states, who fear Iranian expansion, while Iran receives limited support from Syria and Libya. The war lasts for 8 devastating years, claiming an estimated 1 million lives, and ends in a stalemate, with neither side achieving its objectives, but leaving both countries economically devastated and deeply scarred. The 1980s also witness a new phase in the Palestinian struggle. In December 1987, the First Intifada, or uprising, erupts in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. This largely spontaneous, grassroots movement of civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance, including strikes, boycotts, and mass demonstrations, is carried out primarily by Palestinian civilians, many of them young, against the Israeli occupation. The Israeli military responds with force, leading to widespread casualties and human rights abuses. The Intifada, however, successfully brings the Palestinian issue back to the forefront of international attention and forces Israel to grapple with the long-term costs of occupation. It also strengthens the PLO's diplomatic hand, as the world increasingly recognizes the urgency of addressing Palestinian grievances. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 fundamentally reshapes global geopolitics, ending the Cold War and its proxy conflicts in the Middle East. The United States emerges as the sole superpower, increasing its leverage in regional affairs. This new global order, coupled with the PLO's declining international support after its backing of Iraq in the Gulf War, creates an opening for a renewed peace process. In 1993, a groundbreaking moment arrives with the signing of the Oslo Accords between Israel and the PLO. Secretly negotiated in Norway, these agreements mark the first direct, mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO. The accords envision a phased process of Israeli withdrawal from parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, leading to Palestinian self-rule through the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, PA. Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, and Shimon Peres are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. However, the Oslo Accords are deeply controversial, sparking fierce opposition from both Israeli right-wingers and Palestinian hardliners. For many Israelis, the agreement is seen as a dangerous concession to terrorists, while for many Palestinians, it falls far short of their aspirations for full statehood and right of return. The process is plagued by a lack of trust, continued Israeli settlement expansion, and ongoing violence from both sides. The mid-1990s bring further diplomatic progress. In 1994, Jordan, under King Hussein, signs a peace treaty with Israel, becoming the second Arab nation to formally recognize the Jewish state. This treaty normalizes relations and resolves long-standing border disputes. However, the optimism generated by these agreements is fragile. In November 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a key architect of Oslo, is assassinated by a Jewish ultranationalist who opposes the peace process. His death deals a devastating blow to the momentum for peace, creating a leadership vacuum and deepening divisions within Israeli society. The late 1990s and early 2000s see the peace process falter and eventually collapse. The Camp David summit in 2000, between Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat, and U.S. President Bill Clinton, fails to bridge the remaining gaps on core issues like Jerusalem, refugees, and borders. The failure of the summit, coupled with growing Palestinian frustration over continued occupation and settlement expansion, leads to the outbreak of the Second Intifada in September 2000. This uprising is far more violent than the first, marked by suicide bombings by Palestinian militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and overwhelming military responses from Israel, including incursions into Palestinian cities. Thousands of lives are lost on both sides, and the dream of a two-state solution seems more distant than ever. The 9/11 attacks in 2001, perpetrated by al-Qaeda, fundamentally shift the global security landscape and reorient U.S. foreign policy towards a war on terror. The Middle East, already a volatile region, becomes the central arena for this new global struggle. The Bush administration, convinced that Saddam Hussein's Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction and harbors terrorists, pushes for regime change. In March 2003, the United States, with a coalition of the willing, but without a UN Security Council resolution, invades Iraq. Saddam Hussein's regime quickly collapses, but the subsequent occupation proves far more difficult than anticipated. The absence of a clear post-invasion plan, the disbanding of the Iraqi army, and the rise of a sectarian insurgency plunge Iraq into a brutal civil war between Sunni and Shiite factions. The war destabilizes the entire region, empowering Iran, creating a breeding ground for extremist groups, and leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and thousands of coalition soldiers. The promise of a democratic, stable Iraq quickly unravels into chaos and prolonged conflict. The mid-2000s also see the rise of new, non-state actors in the Middle East, challenging the traditional state-centric order. Hezbollah, a Shiite Islamist political party and militant group in Lebanon, supported by Iran and Syria, gains significant political and military power. Its conflict with Israel in 2006, sparked by Hezbollah's capture of Israeli soldiers, results in a month-long war that devastates parts of Lebanon and demonstrates Hezbollah's formidable military capabilities, further complicating the regional security equation. In the Palestinian territories, the internal political landscape shifts dramatically. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdraws its troops and settlers from the Gaza Strip, a move intended to reduce friction, but without a broader peace framework. In 2006, Hamas, an Islamist militant organization that rejects Israel's existence and advocates for armed resistance, wins the Palestinian legislative elections, shocking the international community and further fragmenting Palestinian leadership. The subsequent power struggle between Hamas in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank leads to a violent split in 2007, creating two separate Palestinian administrations and hindering any unified approach to peace. The late 2000s and early 2010s are marked by escalating tensions between Iran and the West over Iran's nuclear program. Fears that Iran is developing nuclear weapons lead to international sanctions and threats of military action. The potential for a nuclear-armed Iran adds another layer of profound instability to an already combustible region, prompting concerns about a regional arms race and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Then, in late 2010, a spontaneous wave of popular uprisings, known as the Arab Spring, sweeps across the Middle East and North Africa. Beginning in Tunisia with the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi, protests erupt in country after country, fueled by widespread grievances against authoritarian regimes, corruption, economic stagnation, and a yearning for greater freedom and dignity. In Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen, long-standing dictators are overthrown. In Bahrain and Syria, however, the protests are brutally suppressed, leading to prolonged civil wars. The Syrian Civil War, which begins in March 2011, quickly devolves into one of the most devastating conflicts of the 21st century. What started as peaceful protests against President Bashar al-Assad's regime transforms into a multi-sided proxy war involving regional and international powers. Iran and Russia staunchly back Assad, while various rebel factions receive support from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Western nations. The war leads to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, the displacement of millions, and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS, further destabilizing the region and creating a massive humanitarian crisis. The conflict becomes a brutal battleground for regional hegemonic rivalries, particularly between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, in 2014 represents a new and terrifying threat. Exploiting the chaos of the Syrian civil war and the sectarian divisions in Iraq, ISIS, a radical Sunni jihadist group, seizes vast swathes of territory in both countries, declares a caliphate, and implements a brutal interpretation of Islamic law. Its extreme violence, including mass executions and the destruction of ancient historical sites, and its sophisticated propaganda machine, draw international condemnation and intervention. A US-led coalition launches airstrikes against ISIS, and local forces, including Iraqi government troops, Kurdish Peshmerga, and Syrian opposition groups, fight to reclaim territory. ISIS's rise and the global response to it further entrench the cycle of violence and extremism in the region. The ongoing proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran casts a long shadow over the entire Middle East. This rivalry, rooted in sectarian differences, Sunni vs. Shiite geopolitical ambitions and competition for regional dominance plays out in various conflicts, including the civil wars in Yemen and Syria, and political struggles in Lebanon and Iraq. Saudi Arabia, a Sunni monarchy, sees Iran's revolutionary Shiite ideology and its network of proxies, Hezbollah, Houthi rebels in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, as an existential threat to its own security and regional influence. Iran, in turn, views Saudi Arabia as a US-backed adversary, seeking to undermine its regional standing. The constant maneuvering, funding of proxy groups, and rhetorical clashes between these two regional powers fuel instability and prevent resolution to numerous conflicts. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains an open wound. Despite numerous attempts at peace, including the Annapolis Conference in 2007 and various US-led initiatives, a two-state solution seems increasingly remote. Continued Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank, internal Palestinian divisions, and a lack of political will on both sides have created a deep sense of despair. Periodic escalations of violence, particularly between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, such as the conflicts in 2008-2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021, serve as stark reminders of the unresolved core issues. As we stand in the present, the Middle East remains a crucible of complexity, a landscape shaped by the echoes of ancient empires, the scars of colonial interventions, and the relentless churn of contemporary power struggles. The threads of history we've traced, from the dawn of civilization to the current moment, intertwine to form a tapestry of enduring conflict, where peace often feels like a mirage. The region's geopolitical chessboard is now more intricate than ever. The United States, though still a major player, has seen its influence challenged by the rise of other global powers like China and Russia. China's Belt and Road Initiative weaves new economic ties across the region, while Russia, emboldened by its intervention in Syria, reasserts its military and political presence, often at odds with American interests. This multipolar environment means that regional actors have more options for alliances and patronage, further complicating efforts to forge consensus or enforce stability. The rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran continues to be a central axis of instability. It's a cold war within a hot region, fought not with direct military confrontation, but through proxy conflicts, economic competition, and ideological battles. From the ongoing devastation in Yemen, where a Saudi-led coalition battles Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, to the intricate political maneuvering in Iraq and Lebanon, the shadow of this sectarian and geopolitical struggle extends across the entire Middle East. Any hope for broad regional stability often hinges on a de-escalation of this fundamental rivalry, yet its roots are deep, intertwined with religious identity, national pride, and strategic ambitions. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, despite its global prominence, seems locked in a perpetual stalemate. The peace process of the 1990s has largely given way to a grim reality of occupation, settlement expansion, and periodic outbreaks of intense violence. The prospect of a viable two-state solution, once the international consensus, appears increasingly distant as demographic realities shift and political will on both sides wanes. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza persists, and the daily indignities of occupation fuel despair and radicalization. For peace to emerge, a fundamental shift in perception and a renewed commitment to justice and security for both Israelis and Palestinians will be required. Beyond these high-profile conflicts, the region grapples with a host of internal challenges. Governance remains a critical issue, with many states struggling to meet the demands of their burgeoning populations. Authoritarian regimes, often propped up by external powers, face increasing pressure from citizens yearning for political reform, economic opportunity, and basic human rights. The promise of the Arab Spring, though largely unfulfilled in terms of democratic transitions, revealed the deep-seated popular discontent that continues to simmer beneath the surface. Economic diversification is another pressing concern. While oil and gas wealth has provided immense resources for some nations, it has also created economies vulnerable to global price fluctuations and slow to adapt to a changing world. Youth unemployment is alarmingly high across many parts of the Middle East, creating a fertile ground for frustration and recruitment by extremist groups. Climate change, too, poses an existential threat, with rising temperatures, desertification, and water scarcity already exacerbating existing tensions and threatening livelihoods, particularly in agricultural areas. Extremism, in various forms, continues to plague the region. While ISIS has been militarily defeated as a territorial caliphate, its ideology persists, and new iterations of radical groups constantly emerge, exploiting grievances and power vacuums. The fight against terrorism is a never-ending battle, requiring not just military force, but also comprehensive strategies to counter radical narratives, address root causes of disenfranchisement, and promote inclusive governance. The humanitarian cost of these protracted conflicts is staggering. Millions have been displaced, becoming refugees in neighboring countries or internally displaced within their own borders. The destruction of infrastructure, the collapse of social services, and the trauma inflicted on generations will take decades, if not centuries, to heal. The international community, while providing aid, often struggles to address the underlying political drivers of these crises. Looking ahead, the path to peace in the Middle East is not a single, clear highway, but a labyrinth of intertwined challenges. It demands a recalibration of international engagement, moving beyond short-term strategic interests to a more holistic approach that prioritizes human security, inclusive governance, and sustainable development. It requires regional actors to move beyond zero-sum rivalries and embrace cooperation, recognizing that shared challenges like water scarcity, climate change, and economic stagnation demand collective solutions. Most importantly, it will necessitate a profound reckoning with history, acknowledging past injustices, fostering mutual understanding, and building genuine trust between peoples who have too often been pitted against each other. The Middle East, the cradle of civilization, has gifted humanity with unparalleled innovations, profound spiritual wisdom, and breathtaking cultural achievements. Its peoples are resilient, resourceful, and deeply connected to their heritage. While the quest for lasting peace remains elusive, the region's rich history also offers glimmers of hope. Moments of coexistence, periods of intellectual flourishing, and the enduring human desire for dignity and a better future. The narrative of conflict is not the only story. The potential for renewal, reconciliation, and a future where peace can